thanks for allowing me to come by and just share a little bit about the research, the work that we've been doing that's focused on increasing historically underrepresented students in a lot of the disciplines that we represent in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources. My name is Stacy Nelson. I'm a professor in the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jennifer Richmond Bryant as part of our panelists. She's also a professor in the department as well too. And we are missing Dr. Zakia Leggett. I think she'll be joining us online, so I know she's with us in spirit. But thank you again for taking your time out of your busy day to join us. And again, thinking about where we are, increasing underrepresented people within some of our STEM fields and our disciplines. You know what, when I think about this, I can't help but think that we've been asking some of the same questions for the last 30 years and really just trying to figure out how do we do this. And it reminds me of when I was in high school. I was actually a swim instructor and lifeguard for the YMCA, for our local YMCA. And I was horrified when I would hear some of the older guards laughing and joking and kidding about picking up these little terrified kids, throwing them into the 12 feet of water, standing around the edge of the pool and screaming at them, swim. And this was their idea of teaching kids how to swim. Okay. So I also, so fast forward to today, I also can't help to think that some of the times we focus on addressing the symptoms without really trying to figure out what the solutions are here when it comes to increasing our representation. There's a lot of different programs, there's REU programs, I'll talk a little bit about that as well too, but does it really get to the root of what our problems actually are? So, there we go. Okay. So in thinking about this talk today, or this overview, and I'll back up for a second. I'm going to talk for about maybe 30 minutes or so, and then I'll open the room up for questions that Dr. Richmond Bryant and I can actually address with everybody. But just thinking about coming up here and giving an overview about some of our work, and the title of this symposium, Equity Research Symposium. The two words that really jumped out to me were equity research, okay? And so for me, that led to a series of other questions, like how do we really obtain equity? Why do we or should we want to do this? Is research the most appropriate or prudent space to do this in? Who does our research serve, as well as who's missing and why? So again, hopefully during the panel discussion, these are some questions that we can address with everyone as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about diversity and inclusion as a starting place, because you can't have diversity without inclusion, and we all know that equity is the glue that holds it all together, right? So when we think about diversity and inclusion, we know now that it's pretty undisputable that diversity and inclusion has many academic impacts as well as many societal impacts as well too. And again, going back to the title of this symposia, Equity Research Symposium, it made me think about equity in research. So this becomes a little bit deeper question. So what exactly is equity? Now, from the summer of 2020, when the whole world witnessed the murder of George Floyd, a lot of companies, a lot of agencies, a lot of industries, and even academic institutions raced to be what they called anti-racist. And they all came up with their mantras. One of the companies that I actually thought was pretty good was United Way's stance. on being anti-racist. Actually, they said that they would be equity-centered or equity-focused in every single thing that they do. And on their website, they actually went into definitions of, there it is, definitions of what equality is versus what equity is, because a lot of folks get this confused, right? And so they actually said that equity is giving everyone the exact same resources across the board, and that's whether they need it or not. Equality is giving everyone the exact same resources across the board, whether they need it or not. But then equity recognizes that everyone's different. People start at different places, and it looks at people's needs and their need for those different resources that they need to be able to thrive. And I'm sure everyone is familiar with this cartoon by Angus McGuire. We've seen it over and over again. It's this cartoon about these three kids, and they just want to see the baseball game. That's all they want to do. They want to see the baseball game. But if we consider equality, we give them all a box to stand on. We don't take into account their needs, right? If we consider equity, then we do consider those needs, and we ensure that they have the need, they have the resources. But if we want to consider true equity and inclusion, we have to make sure that everyone has not only the resources that they need to succeed, but they also get to enjoy the experience. So again, just going back to how we think about this, I think I'm pointing in the wrong direction. There we go. So how do we become equity-focused in research? What are the inequities in our own research? So let's let this question just sink in for a minute. What are the inequities in our own research? And I get it. I know we're always under a lot of pressure. I get it. But when we start to think beyond that, then this becomes a very deep question. And again, hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that a little later on. Okay, so academia is actually changing, right? If we look at some of the data from 1976 to 2015, there's been differences in the number of students of color that are attending college. In 76, nearly 16% of college students were students of color. In 2015, 42% were students of color. So that's a increase, right? But then if we take a look at even some of the data from the American Council on Education, they said from 2015 to 2016, approximately 45% of all undergraduate students were identified as being non-white. So who are we? So I actually went to NC State's website, their institutional strategy and analysis webpage, and they have some archival data that's available. And unfortunately, it says that it goes from 1976 to present, but unfortunately only goes from 1976 to I think about 2018. And again, this data is not being updated. This is only historical data that's left on the website. But I took advantage of it and went ahead and graphed this thing out. So taking a look at this data set, if you look at this top line that you see there, that represents our percentage of white students within that 42-year time frame. If we look at the lines lower to the bottom there, we can see that represents the ethnic categories that were considered in this data set. And what we would love to see is we'd love to see it start out at one point over this whole 42-year history, but then in 42 years, we would love to see a substantial increase in these graphs. Okay? Well, not unfortunately, but the only group or category that we really see an increase above the 10% line is our international students. So if I remove the white student line or the white category, we can maybe drill down into these lines just a little bit more. So if we take a look here, and again, this red line now represents our 10% over those 42 years. If we take a look at the green line represents our international students. And again, in 42 years, it's just peaking over that 10%. The blue line represents our African American students. So you see roughly from what is that, about maybe the mid 80s to about maybe 2005, we had an increase in African American students. But then we also see a decline following those years, leading to the 2018. The next line is the blue line, or whatever color that line is, I'm sorry. Okay, so that line represents our Asian students, and we can see only within the last year we're starting to see, the last few years we're starting to see an uptick. And then we have the yellow line representing our Hispanic students. We see that same trend, starting a little bit of an uptick there. And then for Native American students, still remaining 42 years relatively flat, right? And so that's ethnicity. When we think about gender, this is very interesting. Since roughly about the mid-80s, we have seen substantial increases in women enrolling in U.S. colleges. From 1975, we had more men that attended college than women. In 2019, women of all races outnumbered men. And even taking a look at some of our data again, there it is. Taking a look at some of our data again, and this represents data from 1950 to about 2013, if I remember correctly. Graphing that out, we can see the increase, the red line on the bottom, that represents our increase in women, and then that decreasing blue line represents men. There we go. Okay, and so again, this has started to even allow us to ask some different questions. It's been noted through a lot of publications now that women are outnumbering the men, and even with the graduation rates as well too. And it's not just in any one particular race, but it's across all the races. We're starting to see more women enrolling in college. But we're starting to ask, at least the Pew Research Institute has asked, okay, well, what's going on? What's going on with this gap between the men and the women? And then this article from The Atlantic says colleges have a guy problem, right? So even though overall we've seen over the last 5 years roughly about 1.5 million decrease in overall college enrollments, over the last year, I think it's over the last year, we've seen probably about a 400,000 male student decline and a 200,000 women enrollment decline. Okay. And this article here from the Wall Street Journal, has guys just saying that, hey, they're feeling lost. And again, there's a number of different reasons they've given, this kind of shifting gender balance in overall enrollments, to guys realizing that, or men realizing that they can still find good paying jobs without going to college, to women realizing that there's still a male-female gender gap, and they still have to work twice as hard to be considered fairly, and they realize that credentializing themselves is important. Men can still find good-paying jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And then, and even with the pandemic, you're having some men saying that they'd rather prioritize earning than going to school. So there's a number of different reasons as well. But and these shifting demographic trends carry through even when we consider our LGBT community as well too. whereas in the 70s, we had fewer students being out, and today, we have a lot more LGBT students that are making bold stands for representation, okay? So academia is changing, or is it? Right? As a matter of fact, I know we're supposed to be super innovative, we're supposed to be creative, we're supposed to be on the cutting edge, we're supposed to be pushing the envelope in all things, right? Remember that 42-year data that I showed you? Right? But in all things, right? And you know, some of these traditions or histories make it difficult for us to move ahead and think differently how we do things. Okay. Okay, so it's true that the nation and the world are changing. Different voices will be making future decisions on how our resources are going to be governed. Demographic shifts towards this majority-minority by the middle of the 21st century is coming, right? And this is going to impact everything from our voting districts, political orientations, future workforce, private industry and citizen engagements, and even our overall economic structure. As a matter of fact, this has been written about in a lot of different articles. Just checking out some of the titles here, that whites account for under half of U.S. births. The Brookings Institute says our shift to the majority minority population in the U.S. is happening a lot quicker than they expected. This title from NBC says, white majority in U.S. gone by 2043. Right, so it's sensationalized a little bit, I get it. But how about this one from CNN? Meet America's emerging minority groups, the whites, right? Okay, so they sensationalize it, but still, it's interesting, right? That things are changing. But remember that 42-year data I showed you? Okay, I'm sorry. And also, I stole this graph from our 21st century great bastion of knowledge, Wikipedia. And it shows 6 states that are now majority minority. As a matter of fact, these are 6 states where non-Hispanic whites account for less than 50% of the population. And those are the states that are shown there in the orange. And then the yellow states represent about 10 more states where 60% of the non-Hispanic white are less than 60% of the total population. Okay, okay. And then also what's interesting is that I remember seeing reports before 2008 that said North Carolina had the 5th fastest growing Hispanic population in the country. 2008 happened, we had the mortgage meltdown, the housing bust, things changed. But this article from October suggests that North Carolina has seen the Hispanic population grow faster than any other racial ethnicity, and that 1 in 4 Hispanics in North Carolina live in either Mecklenburg County or Wake County. Okay, so our national estimates suggest that as of 2020, 50% of all under 18 populations are non-white. And in less than 10 years, our entire under 30 population will be non-white. Okay. And so again, academia, the nation, and the world, we're all changing, but we have to change as well too. And we know that there's other things external to the university, even external to our state, that are going to have huge impacts. We think about geopolitical conflicts that's ongoing. You turn on the news today, you can hear more about what's going on. The globalization of world-class research and education, where they're now saying that the United States is no longer the preeminent leader. That's a distinction that the United States has held for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, I think it's BusinessInsider.com says that the world's 5 most innovative countries are now Germany, South Korea, Singapore, Switzerland, and Sweden. Okay, and between 2025 and 2030, there's going to be a drop in birth rates. And then we have Generation Alpha. So those are children born starting in 2010, and they're now roughly about 6 years away from showing up on our doorstep. Okay, so we do have to work at ensuring that we're hearing from all groups, we're representing all groups, and we have to acknowledge that we have had challenges in attracting, recruiting, and retaining students from historically underrepresented groups. And we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that as well too. But again, it's not all bad news. So as far as the STEM economy goes, well, the US economy, and this is prior to the COVID pandemic, right? The US economy, employment forecasts that we'd have economic growth of over 7% between 2016 and 2026. But the STEM fields were expected to grow beyond that, roughly about 10 or 11%. And that the earnings from these STEM fields would be somewhere between the 29 to 39%, per hour range. Roughly that equates to about $89,000 a year to $49,000 a year range. And our 2021 STEM Growth Index actually puts Raleigh in a really good place to be. It has Raleigh ranked number 7 for STEM growth, and it even highlights the new Apple campus that's coming that should add about 3,000 jobs at a average salary of $187,000 a year. Okay, so what's our responsibility here? So implications go across the broad spectrum of everything that we do, everything that we aspire to be. It has implications towards how we grow, how we move as a system, how we grow as a college, how we impact and affect the university, how we interact with our community partners, and how we impact other institutions, everything from K to career. Okay. So, interestingly enough, North Carolina State University, being a land-grant institution, has a bold mission. Think about this. In 1862, when Senator from Vermont, Justin Morrill, decided that there needed to be increased public access for everyone, they created the land-grant system. All 6 of you in this room, I would bet anything that this university system was not created for you. It was not created for you. If not for this Morrill Act of 1862 that opened a broader reach and broader access for more people, the commoners. Now, unless you were born with a silver spoon in your mouth, or you had political friends, or with some influence, then maybe it was created for you. But for the majority of us, it was not. So it was a very bold move for the federal government to prioritize, to invest in prioritizing education. Okay? So again, this is the land-grant portion of that land-grant university system. That's what makes it different to be a part of a land-grant institution. But on the same token, it also gives us that same authority to act boldly, to be different, to think about how we do things differently, instead of constantly thinking about how we do things based on history, how we do things based on tradition, right? Okay. All right, so again, we do have challenges attracting, recruiting, retaining historically underrepresented groups. And 2, we've got to figure out who our communities are, right? Our core communities represent our students, our staff, and faculty, but they also expand out to our alumni, our partners, and our stakeholders as well, too. And so this program that I want to talk to you a little bit about is mainly geared towards increasing graduate representation in our disciplines within the Department of Forestry and Environmental Resources. Okay. And so mainly our students, right? But again, traditional REUs, I mentioned that before, has been one of our go-to methods for doing it because it's cool. It allows us to bring students in largely from minority-serving institutions, whether that's Asian Pacific Islander institutions, tribal colleges, Hispanic-serving institutions, or these 100 or so HBCUs that are around the country as well, too. But it brings these students in and it exposes them to who we are. It gives them a chance to work in our labs and to do research. I was a REU product for a very, very long time. Okay, but we have to ask ourselves, is this equality or is this equity? If we go back to thinking about that Angus McGuire cartoon, are we just giving students those boxes? Are we giving them the resources they need? Okay. There we go. Okay. I'll back up for a second. Okay, there we go. So, you know what? Thinking about HBCUs, I'm also a product of an HBCU as well. We think about land-grant institutions and how wonderful they were to provide access for the common people. But all land grants aren't equal, right? So if you start thinking about the 1890 land grants, which was a separate system that was set up for providing funds for historically black colleges and universities, these institutions have been historically underfunded. That has rippling effects through to this whole idea of equity in research, right? We're an R1 institution, Carnegie designation, right? So along with that, that brings prestige. Along with that, that brings funding that a lot of these other schools don't get the advantage of experiencing, at least not yet, right? But there has been new lawsuits that have moved forward. I know Tennessee State University has sued the state of Tennessee for I think they said they owe them probably over $500 million for just historic periods of being underfunded. Morgan State University has been in the news as well too. The president, David Wilson of Morgan State University, the whole state of Maryland, I think they were awarded $577 million, and then the state of Maryland may have tried to settle with them for about $200 million. But David Wilson wants to put those funds into building up the research efforts. They want to build up those research structures, and along with other funds that they received from McKinsey Scott, I think McKinsey Scott gave them another $40 million. So they want to take those resources and they really want to try to build up to a Research 1 status. As a matter of fact, between my master's and my PhD, I taught at Southern University in New Orleans, which is an HBCU in New Orleans. Matter of fact, at that time it was a commuter school, so we served a very, very different segment of the population. And my appointment was 6, 6, and 2. That means fall, I taught 6 classes. Spring, I taught 6 classes. Summer, I taught 6 classes. There was no time for research. There was no time for research, right? Because along with those teaching responsibilities came nourishing responsibilities as well too. Because again, it was a very different population of students that were still historically first-generation students, never experienced college before, and really needed the support to get through. So again, a very different type of assignment. Okay. Oh, interestingly enough, I want to just show this article. So this is a new article that's in the Chronicle of Higher Education just within the last week or two, but it's filed under funding inequity. And it's talking about HBCUs race to the top and trying to reach R1 status. But if you just put in Chronicle of Higher Education and funding inequities, it comes right up. Again, we're talking about equity in research, right? Okay, so again, you know, this whole REU thing, I think, is always a great approach. It gets us a chance to bring in talented students, bring them into our labs, show them who we are, and then hopefully, if things work out and the funding is right, those sorts of things, we can pluck that student off and offer that person a graduate assistantship, right? And so that becomes our traditional approach. Again, that was my pathway, right? What happens to the students that get left behind? We need pathways that provide these bridges that allow more students to come across. There we go. There we go, okay. That allow more students to come across. And it takes that innovative, creative thinking in order to make that happen when we know that there's disparities that exist out there. Again, I actually call this a one-way transfer problem. And so just the nuts and bolts of it, these minority-serving institutions, we find great, wonderful, gifted, talented students. We bring those students in through maybe an REU or a summer program to our predominantly white institution, and then we expose them to who we are, right? If we consider a different approach, what I call a multi-institutional partnership approach, this creates a win-win-win scenario because we go from the minority-serving institutions. We realize that there are certain inequities there. We realize there are certain labor or teaching or work responsibilities that may be completely different from what we have here. But we work with not just the students, but also the faculties. And we bring those faculty along with the student and make them a part of the graduate research committee so that from day one, they're helping us set that research agenda. And then what we do is we make sure that the students have not only the faculty support, but also the resources to build capacity back at that home institution, because we entertain the students here, getting their fall and spring semester courses out of the way, but then we send them back to their home institution to complete their research. So that means if they don't have the lab equipment, if they don't have the field equipment, if they don't have the whatever it is it takes them to be successful, we supply that. And we do this by making sure that we're surrounded with by a lot of partners, right? We make sure that we're surrounded by a lot of partners. So where we can't fill in those gaps, we've got other folks that can fill in those gaps as well too. So again, this helps us increase the engagement of these underserved groups, increase active partnerships on many institutional levels, from federal research and land management agencies, local and state agencies, and also this partnership between the majority and the minority serving communities as well too. And it also helps us to build institutional capacity at that home institution that often have some of the greatest ability to reach greater numbers of underserved students. Okay, and so this partnership is a partnership, well, one of the partnerships that I've been involved in is going on 12 years now. And that's a partnership with the United States Forest Service, University of Puerto Rico campuses, 4 to 5 different campuses, as well as work with Michigan State University as well too. Okay, so again, the way that this works, the graduate students are recruited from those 4 or 5 different UPR campuses. They're guided by the collaboration of faculty as well as agency partners. And they spend the academic semesters at NC State or Michigan State University, and then they return to UPR to conduct their research. right? So this gives them this home-based approach, but we also try to recruit our students in a cohort to circumvent this adjustment of isolation and also to establish a critical mass. Okay, and so the added benefits is that we create this two-way transfer. So it's not just that one-way transfer problem that I was telling you about, where we take the best and the gifted and the brightest, and then we make them into who we want them to be. But we get a chance to listen from the onset of what the needs are, what the research needs are of that home institution. And we use that student as a conduit or as a bridge to really help filling those gaps, to building those programs. So we leverage those shared resources as well too. Okay, and so again, it helps us build these expansive networks. This is just a partial list of some of the folks that we've worked with throughout this project, going on 12 years now. And one interesting thing I'll say is that working with historically underrepresented students, those students don't necessarily have the same experiences and exposures that we expect from our more traditional students. Again, oftentimes a lot of those students tend to be first-generation students. If they're not first-generation students, they're first-generation graduate students, okay? And working with students from backgrounds that don't necessarily have the level of college exposure that some of our traditional students have, you've got to do some convincing. And I'm not just talking about the students. I'm talking about mom, and I'm talking about dad, I'm talking about uncles, and I'm talking about the community. Because they don't have these role models in their communities. You know, no one has been a forest scientist or an environmental researcher or an ecologist or what have you. So to give up 2 to 3 years to go off and spend time doing this kind of thing, when you could be going home and getting a job, already paid for you to go through school and get a 4-year bachelor's degree, it's a significant investment and it needs to be worthwhile. So we work with the agencies to make sure that we are directly addressing their critical workforce missions, make sure we're training these students for jobs that the agencies need, and we've done this with the USGS, and we've also been working with the Forest Service Southern Research Station to make sure we're training students for these mission-critical jobs, okay? And then two, really quickly, here's a list of all the students that have participated in this program. So far, we have one current student that is a part of this program. She is actually a student over in applied ecology right now. My most recent student that came out of, okay, oh yeah, here we go. And two, this kind of shows you the breakdown of the students that went to Michigan State University and to NC State University. Okay, so roughly about 5 students went to Michigan State University and 8 students at North Carolina State University. And my most recent student, she came out last spring, Jashira Pabon Torres. She finished her degree and was awarded the NOS Fellowship in Washington, Marine Policy Fellowship in Washington, D.C., where she's been doing an outstanding job. She's wrapping that up right now. And she has been having conversations with the Puerto Rico Sea Grant about returning home and doing some work with them. Okay. All right, so just closing remarks really, really quickly. All of this work is not easy. This work represents stuff that's probably 90% off the clock, if there is really such thing as off the clock. But it takes champions and advocates and heroes to really do this kind of thing. And I've got to leave you with this one saying. So to get this project rolling at Michigan State, I had one of my former advisors, former dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences at Michigan, Agriculture and Natural Sciences at Michigan State, and chairperson. He would always drag me to all of these partnership meetings. I'm working on my PhD, and some of this stuff had absolutely nothing at all to do with the stuff I was working on. But he would drag me to all of these different meetings with the Department of Environmental Quality and other stakeholders and all of this other kind of stuff. And I just figure he was trying to squeeze them. He was trying to get the money out of them, right? And so I was like, okay, Dr. Taylor, do you think you'll get the funding? You think we'll get the funding? And of course, he needed me along because he needed someone to actually do the work, right? But he looked over at me and he said, Stacy, it's all about the people. And if you forget that, you've missed it. And just for acknowledgments, this list is way too short with all the folks that have participated and helped us find ways. Dr. Aaron Sills is sitting over there, helped us creatively find ways to keep this program going. We owe just a debt of thanks. Okay, so I know I spoke for a long time. We still got about 15 minutes. I just want to see, Karen, is it okay if we open it up at this point to questions that folks may have?
Yeah, sure. If anybody has questions, I'll bring you the mic. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you. Could we skip that person, please? I'm sorry. Angela, I love you.
Oh, no, really. No, for real. I, too, am an REU product from HBCU school. My question is for you guys, how do you get students from an HBCU school to feel comfortable at a PWI? I've taught students who don't feel comfortable being around outside of their atmosphere or their environment. How can we make them feel inclusive or feel like they're welcome? That's my question.
I think that's a great question. Stacy just kind of passed it to me. He's been talking for a long time. So it's a challenge, and it's not an easy one to overcome at all. A lot of the students, I think, who come from HBCU backgrounds into state lean on Chafney Grays. Dr. Grays does a fantastic job providing support to students, and that support includes academic and emotional support, and both are equally important. A lot of it is building up trust, too. We had a case, I hope it's okay to share this, we had a student who was here last fall, and Stacy actually kind of brought me in to work with the student, even though it was outside my discipline. And a lot of the time, it took a really long time to build up trust. And unfortunately, in this case, the student wasn't quite prepared and gave us some ideas of ways that we could try to do better in the future. But ultimately, the student ended up leaving the master's program and getting a job. But we temporarily for now, we hope that this person will come back in the near future. But he clearly needed a little bit of time to get to know the field and be supported. And I think that one of the things that was kind of striking was, for a while, he frankly wasn't straight with me about some things. And I think that inherently there's so much distrust built up in this system that he didn't know he could believe what I had to say. And I think it wasn't really until when it became apparent that he was not going to be successful at this point in time. And so we kind of shifted our approach and said, okay, let's help find him a job, which he now has, that it made a big difference, I think, in his trust level, because he felt like, okay, these people are going to see it through. And so I think in this case, if he decides to come back in a couple of years, he knows that he'll be well supported. And I think that we need to start establishing those relationships sooner, Stacy and I and Zakiya have been talking about maybe trying to look at grants that would build capacity and along the lines of the program at UPR, where it would build capacity at the lower levels, like undergraduate levels, so that when students come here, they know what to expect. They're prepared. They don't have to come here. They could go to an HBCU program. They could go to here. They could go to another R1 institute. And either way, the support has been given. And I think that if we establish those kinds of really sincere relationships, that we're more likely to recruit and might do a little bit better in terms of making our population look a little more like the state of North Carolina, but also that that when the students come here, they know that they can believe what we're saying. And in fact, just kind of a coda on the point with the student, I texted him, I don't know, a week and a half or two ago, and I just said, you know, hey, I just want to see how everything's going. Are you liking the new job?
He's enjoying himself.
And he really is enjoying himself, and I think in the grand scheme of things, because he was working at a warehouse at Amazon before coming back to school. He graduated from A&T a year and a half ago, I think. And he, I think now, is starting to feel that competence in the field. But I think that follow through, you know, when I got in touch with him, he said, you know, I was just thinking about you and thinking about getting in touch. And the fact that at least we're starting to build up that conversation and build up trust. And I feel like we just have a long way to go and a lot of work to do to establish that. Would you
So I was going to add to that question. I'm actually a graduate student in the College of Education. My background, I graduated from Fayetteville State. I have my master's from Howard, so both HBCUs to then attend NC State. And so one thing that I can say I noticed that may help with the transition is that relationship piece. So coming from the HBCU background, I realized that we're very rich in connection and relationship. Whereas here, we're very rich in a lot of financial resources. And I think that both ways they can be exchanged. So, you know, HBCUs benefiting financially a little more. And then on our end, doing more to build those relationships before we arrive. So at recruitment events in the spring, whenever there's activities or there's interest meetings for the graduate programs, really starting to build those relationships in social groups and social networks, or reaching out then, getting their contact information so that when they matriculate into the program, they already have the support that's around them and that they could need to, you know, really succeed.
I think that's an excellent point.
Yeah. Other questions? Thank you.
Yeah, so our keynote speaker today really emphasized how our students that are not yet at college are struggling with COVID. And we know they're behind. And we know the students of color are going to be behind. And we know the youngest children are struggling with social behavior, social integration, you know, those sorts of things. And so I feel like K through 12 is wrestling right now with something that's going to be in our universe sooner rather than later. And so thinking about equity and meeting people where they are, can you talk about some things maybe that's happening at the university to try to do that? And maybe the pandemic is the sort of like spark that allows some of these innovative approaches and ideas to help provide, I don't want to say individualized, but maybe more attentive and equitable education for all students, but particularly of those with disadvantaged backgrounds.
You know, I can start off just by saying that I remember when we converted to remote learning. I think I was really impressed with the message at that time that came from leadership. That message had the word grace in it. I've been here almost 20 years now, and I have never heard us use the word grace in anything. And so being able to understand that this pandemic disproportionately impacts everyone, all of us. I was at the dining room table with a middle schooler. You know, when we went to remote learning, when the schools closed down, there wasn't this, it was basically like, you now have to do your job, but you also have to be a teacher, full-time, 24/7. So we were all going through it, and I definitely understand that it really has to reshape the way that we think about moving forward and what we gauge as going to be our metrics for student success. The populations that we reach are going to be constantly and ever evolving. And I don't think we really have a great handle on that, but one of the things this pandemic may have helped us with is to be a little bit more sensitive to what some of those burdens that all of us are now dealing with. And I'll let you.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. And sort of speaking to that, having flexible policies. And it was something that I had thought about doing and would work with students if somebody came to me with a problem before.
But as a one-on-one
But
type
as
of
a
thing.
one-on-one kind of thing. But since COVID, one thing is making a policy that says, this is available to everybody. And just saying it on the first day of class. If you have a problem, you don't feel well physically, you don't feel well mentally, you don't have to tell me exactly what the problem is if you don't feel comfortable sharing, but let me know you have something going on, and I will work with you, and I will make chances for you to come back and learn the material if you miss something or you just need another round. You know, some students are just getting back into the swing of things of being in a live classroom again, and that's a little bit intimidating. Other students have developed new ways of life or, you know, have different responsibilities that they've taken on over the pandemic that have made it hard to come to class all the time. So being flexible, having multiple options for students to be able to actually view the material and participate in the class, all of those things, which are maybe harder from a faculty perspective, but I think if it makes the students feel more at ease, ultimately, it's better for everybody.
And I'll just add one other thing. You know, we did go test optional as well, too, as far as admissions go. That's something that I know our administration wants to take a deeper look at to see how well we've done compared to being test required. But again, that still may be another way to look at providing a broader, a richer access to especially students that may have never considered NC State.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, well, join me in thanking our presenters with a round of applause.
Thank you all so much.